31. Nature has ordained that every man should love his children and his relatives above all else. These are now being torn from us by conscription to slave in other lands. Our wives and sisters, even if they are not raped by enemy soldiers, are seduced by men who are supposed to be our friends and guests. Our goods and money are consumed by taxation. Our land is stripped of its harvest to fill their granaries. Our hands and limbs are crippled by building roads through forests and swamps under the lash of our oppressors. Creatures born to be slaves are sold once for all, and, what is more, get their keep from their owners. We Britons are sold into slavery anew every day. We have to pay the purchase price ourselves and feed our masters into the bargain. In a private household, the latest arrival is made the butt even of his fellow slaves. So, in this establishment where all mankind have long been slaves, it is we, the cheap new acquisitions, who are marked out for destruction. For we have no fertile lands, no mines, no ports, which we might be spared to work in. Our courage too, and our martial spirit are against us. Masters do not like such qualities in their subjects. Even our remoteness and isolation, while they give us protection, are bound to make the Romans wonder what mischief we are up to. Since you cannot hope for mercy, therefore, take courage before it is too late to strive for what you hold most dear, whether it be life or honor. The Brigantes, with only a woman to lead them, burned a Roman colony and stormed a camp. And if success had not tempted them to relax their efforts, they might have cast off the yoke. We, who have never been forced to feel that yoke, shall be fighting to preserve our freedom, and not, like them, merely to avenge past injuries. Let us then show, at the very first clash of arms, what manner of men Caledonia has kept in reserve. 32. Do you imagine that the Romans' bravery in war matches their dissoluteness in time of peace? No, it is our quarrels and disunion that have given them fame. The reputation of the Roman army is built up on the faults of its enemies. Look at it, a motley conglomeration of nations that will be shattered by defeat as surely as it is now held together by success. Or can you seriously think that those Gauls and Germans, and to our bitter shame many Britons too, are bound to Rome by genuine loyalty or affection? They may be lending their lifeblood now to the foreign tyrant, but they were enemies of Rome for more years than they have been her slaves. Terror and intimidation are poor bonds of attachment. Once break them, and where fear ends, hatred will begin. All that can spur men on to victory is on our side. The enemy have no wives to fire their courage, no parents ready to taunt them if they run away. Most of them either have no fatherland they can remember, or belong to one other than Rome. See them, a scanty band, scared and bewildered, staring blankly at the unfamiliar sky, sea, and forests around them. The gods have given them, like so many prisoners bound hand and foot, into our hands. Be not afraid of the outward show that means nothing, the glitter of gold and silver that can neither avert nor inflict a wound. Even in the ranks of our enemies we shall find willing hands to help us. The Britons will recognize our cause as their own. The Gauls will remember their lost liberty. The rest of the Germans will desert them as surely as the UCP did recently. And beyond this army that you see there is nothing to be frightened of, only forts without garrisons, colonies of greybeards, towns sick and distracted between rebel subjects and tyrant masters. Which will you choose? To follow your leader into battle, or to submit to taxation, labour in the mines, and all the other tribulations of slavery? Whether you are to endure these forever or take quick vengeance, this field must decide. On then into action, and as you go, think of those that went before you and of those that shall come after. 33. This speech was received with enthusiasm expressed in barbarian fashion by singing and yelling and by discordant cries. Bodies of troops began to move and arms flashed as the most adventurous ran out in front, and all the time their battle line was taking shape. Agricola's soldiers were in such high spirits that they could scarcely be kept within their defences. For all that, he felt it desirable to put the final edge on their courage and addressed them thus. This is the 7th year, comrades, since by loyal service, yours and my own, you started to conquer Britain in the name of Imperial Rome's divinely guided greatness. In all these campaigns and battles, which have called not only for courage in face of the enemy, but for toil and endurance in fighting, as it were, against nature herself, I have had no complaint to make of my men, nor you of your general. Thus we have advanced beyond the limits reached by previous armies under my predecessors. The farthest boundary of this land, which they knew only by report or rumour, we hold in our grasp with arms and fortresses. We have both explored and conquered Britain. Many a time on the march, as you trudged wearily over marshes, mountains, and rivers, have I heard the bravest among you exclaim, "When shall we meet the enemy? When will they come out and fight us?" They are coming now, for we have dug them out of their hiding places. The fair field for our valour that we desired is granted to us. An easy path awaits us if we win, but if we lose, the going will be hard indeed. The long road that we have travelled, the forests we have threaded our way through, the estuaries we have crossed, all redound to our credit and honour as long as we keep our eyes to the front. But if we turn tail, our success in surmounting these obstacles will put us in the deadliest peril. We have not the exact knowledge of the country that our enemy has, or his abundant supplies. However, we have our hands and swords in them, and these are all that matters. For myself, I made up my mind long ago that neither an army nor a commander can avoid danger by running away. So, although an honourable death would be better than a disgraceful attempt to save our lives, our best chance of safety does in fact lie in doing our duty. And there would be glory too in dying, if dying we must, here where the world and all created things come to an end. 34. If you were confronted by strange nations and unfamiliar troops, I would quote the examples of other armies to encourage you. As things are, you need only recall your own battle honours, only question your own eyes. These are the men who last year attacked a single legion like robbers in the night, and acknowledged defeat when they heard your battle cry. These are the greatest runaways of all the Britons, which is the reason why they have survived so long. When we plunged into woods and gorges on the march, all the brave beasts used to charge straight at us, while the timid and slothful ones slunk away at the mere sound of our tread. It is the same now. The most courageous of the Britons have fallen long since. Those who remain are just so many spiritless cowards. You have overtaken them at last, not because they have chosen to stand at bay, but because they are cornered. It is only their desperate plight and deadly fear that have paralyzed their army where it stands for you to win a great and brilliant victory over it. Have done with campaigning. Crown 50 years with one glorious day, and prove to Rome that her soldiers were never to blame if wars have been allowed to drag on, or the seeds of fresh rebellion sown. 35. Even while Agricola was still speaking, the troops showed intense eagerness, and the end of his speech was greeted with a wild burst of enthusiasm. Without delay, they went off to arm themselves. The men were so thrilled that they were ready to rush straight into action, but Agricola marshalled them with care. The auxiliary infantry, 8,000 in number, formed a strong centre, while 3,000 cavalry were distributed on the flanks. The legions were stationed in front of the camp rampart. Victory would be vastly more glorious if it cost no Roman blood, while if the auxiliaries should be repulsed, the legions could come to their rescue. The British army was posted on higher ground in a manner calculated to impress and intimidate its enemy. Their front line was on the plain, but the other ranks seemed to mount up the sloping hillside in close-packed tiers. The flat space between the two armies was taken up by the noisy manoeuvring of the charioteers. Agricola now saw that he was greatly outnumbered, and fearing that the enemy might fall simultaneously on his front and flanks, he opened out his ranks. The line now looked like being dangerously thin, and many urged him to bring up the legions. But he was always an optimist and resolute in the face of difficulties. He sent away his horse and took up his position on foot in front of the colours. 36. The fighting began with exchanges of missiles, and the Britons showed steadiness and skill in parrying our spears with their huge swords or catching them on their little shields, while they themselves rained volleys on us. At last Agricola called upon 4 cohorts of Batavians and 2 of Tungrians to close and fight it out at the sword's point. These old soldiers had been well drilled in sword fighting, while the enemy were awkward at it, with their small shields and unwieldy swords, especially as the latter, having no points, were quite unsuitable for a cut-and-thrust struggle at close quarters. The Batavians, raining blow after blow, striking them with the bosses of their shields and stabbing them in the face, felled the Britons posted on the plain and pushed on up the hillsides. This provoked the other cohorts to attack with vigour and kill the nearest of the enemy. Many Britons were left behind half dead or even unwounded, owing to the very speed of our victory. Our cavalry squadrons, meanwhile, had routed the war chariots and now plunged into the infantry battle. Their first onslaught was terrifying, but the solid ranks of the enemy and the roughness of the ground soon brought them to a standstill and made the battle quite unlike a cavalry action. Our infantry had only a precarious foothold and were being jostled by the horses' flanks, and often a runaway chariot or riderless horses careering about wildly in their terror came plunging into the ranks from the side or in head-on collision. 37. The Britons on the hilltops had so far taken no part in the action and had leisure to note with contempt the smallness of our numbers. They were now starting to descend gradually and envelop our victorious rear. But Agricola, who had expected just such a move, threw in their path 4 squadrons of cavalry which he was keeping in hand for emergencies, and turned their spirited charge into a disorderly rout. The tactics of the Britons now recoiled on themselves. Our squadrons, obedient to orders, rode round from the front of the battle and fell upon the enemy in the rear. The open plain now presented a grim, awe-inspiring spectacle. Our horsemen kept pursuing them, wounded some, making prisoners of others, and then killing them as new enemies appeared. On the British side, each man now behaved according to his character. Whole groups, though they had weapons in their hands, fled before inferior numbers. Elsewhere, unarmed men deliberately charged to face certain death. Equipment, bodies, and mangled limbs lay all around on the blood-stained earth, and even the vanquished now and then recovered their fury and their courage. When they reached the woods, they rallied and profited by their local knowledge to ambush the first rash pursuers. Our men's overconfidence might even have led to serious disaster, but Agricola was everywhere at once. He ordered strong cohorts of light infantry to ring the woods like hunters. Where the thickets were denser, dismounted troopers went in to scour them. Where they thinned out, the cavalry did the work. At length, when they saw our troops reformed and steady, renewing the pursuit, the Britons turned and ran. They no longer kept formation or looked to see where their comrades were, but scattering and deliberately keeping apart from each other, they penetrated far into trackless wilds. The pursuit went on till night fell and our soldiers were tired of killing. Of the enemy, some 10,000 fell. On our side, 360 men, among them Aulus Atticus, the prefect of a cohort, whose youthful impetuosity and mettlesome horse carried him deep into the ranks of the enemy. 38. For the victors, it was a night of rejoicing over their triumph and their booty. The Britons dispersed, men and women wailing together as they carried away their wounded or called to the survivors. Many left their homes and in their rage actually set fire to them, or chose hiding places only to abandon them at once. At one moment they would try to concert plans, then suddenly break off their conference. Sometimes the sight of their dear ones broke their hearts. More often it goaded them to fury, and we had proof that some of them laid violent hands on their wives and children in a kind of pity. The next day revealed the effects of our victory more fully. An awful silence reigned on every hand. The hills were deserted, houses smoking in the distance, and our scouts did not meet a soul. They were sent out in all directions and made sure that the enemy had fled at random and were not massing at any point. As the summer was almost over, it was impossible for operations to be extended over a wider area. So Agricola led his army into the territory of the Boresti. There he took hostages and ordered his admiral to sail round the north of Britain. A detachment of troops was assigned to him, and the terror of Rome had gone before him. Agricola himself, marching slowly in order to overawe the recently conquered tribes by the very deliberateness of his movements, placed his infantry and cavalry in winter quarters. At about the same time, the fleet, which, aided by favourable weather, had completed a remarkable voyage, reached Truculensis Portus. It had started the voyage from that harbour, and after coasting along the adjacent shore of Britain, had returned intact. 39. Agricola's dispatch reported this series of events in language of careful moderation. But Domitian reacted as he often did. He pretended to be pleased when in fact he was deeply disturbed. He was conscious of the ridicule that his sham triumph over Germany had excited when he had bought slaves in the market to have their dress and hair made up to look like prisoners of war. But now came a genuine victory on the grand scale. The enemy dead were reckoned in thousands, and the popular acclaim was immense. He knew that there was nothing so dangerous for him as to have the name of a subject exalted above that of the emperor. He had only wasted his time in silencing forensic eloquence and suppressing all outstanding accomplishments in civil life if another man was to snatch military glory from his grasp. Talents in other directions could at a pinch be ignored, but the qualities of a good general should be the monopoly of the emperor. Harassed by these anxieties, he brooded over them in secret till he was tired, a sure sign in him of some malevolent purpose. In the end, he decided that it would be best to store up his hatred for the present and wait for the first burst of popular applause and the enthusiasm of the army to die down, for at that time Agricola was still in command of Britain. 40. Domitian therefore directed that the customary decorations of a triumph, the honour of a complimentary statue, and all the other substitutes for a triumphal procession should be voted to Agricola in the Senate, coupled with a highly flattering address. Further, the impression was to be conveyed that the province of Syria, then vacant through the death of Attilius Rufus, an ex-consul, and always reserved for men of seniority, was intended for Agricola. It was commonly believed that one of the freedmen in Domitian's closest confidence was sent with a letter offering Syria to Agricola, but with orders to deliver it only if he was still in Britain. The freedman, it is said, met Agricola's ship in the Channel, and without even seeking an interview with him, returned to Domitian. The story may be true, or it may have been invented as being characteristic of Domitian. Agricola, meanwhile, had handed over the province to his successor in a state of peace and security. To avoid publicity, he did not want to be met by a crowd of people when he returned to Rome. So he evaded the attentions of his friends and entered the city by night. By night, too, he went in accordance with instructions to the palace. He was greeted with a perfunctory kiss and then dismissed without a word of conversation to join the crowd of courtiers dancing attendance on the emperor. Wishing to divert attention from his military repute, which was apt to offend civilians by displaying other qualities, Agricola devoted himself completely to a life of quiet retirement. He was modest in his manner of life, courteous in conversation, and never seen with more than one or two friends. Consequently, the majority, who always measure great men by their self-advertisement, after carefully observing Agricola, were left asking why he was so famous. Very few could read his secret aright.